the second biggest monkey head I've ever seen.
I used to be an adventurer like you. Then I took an arrow in the knee.
Can I ever tell you the definition of insanity?
Would you kindly pick up that shortwave radio?
Hello, and welcome to episode 41 of PvA Radio. I am one of your hosts, Luke Croft. Joining me, as always, freelance gaming journalist Cody Mello-Klein. Cody, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing fan-freaking-tastic, Cody. I'm in a really, really good mood. Tomorrow is my Friday, 4-day weekend coming up. It doesn't get any better than that. And I also got big news before we get into big gaming news. But before that, let me introduce my other co-host. His tongue is wider than his mouth, ladies and gentlemen, Larry Hunt.
It's true. It is.
Just one of the many abnormal things about him.
Many.
How are you doing, dude?
I am good. Busy, but good.
Yes, busy. The American way.
Yeah.
You're not wrong.
Larry takes a lot of pride in being able to say how busy he is, too, and I'm not going to give him space to correct that.
I do
Let's
not.
The best way to have a conversation.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, this is PvA Radio. We get together each and every week, and each of us brings one of the biggest gaming news stories to the table, and we have an in-depth discussion about it. It's a collaborative audio feature article, or a CAFA, if you will. And Larry, what do we want people to do with that?
You're going to get a needle, a little bit of ink, dip the needle in the ink, dip the needle in your neighbor's forehead, and tattoo it through their forehead.
I love how we're just aggressively tattooing this shit to other people. And what else would we like to do?
You were supposed to tattoo it to your own forehead, but it's okay. Things have escalated. There's no going back.
Well, look, we're 41 episodes in. If they haven't done it to themselves by now, they're not gonna. So we need to start just speaking to the super fans and telling them what to do. We also want you to spam that emote in the chat because it is an emote over here on twitch.tv/PVA Radio, which is where we go live every Wednesday at 9:30. You can come hang out with us in the chat, talk about the news that we're talking about, tell us what's up. We always love having people in here. But if you can't catch us there, you can catch us on podcast services everywhere, including Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, TuneIn Radio, Luminosity. And I feel like there's some, we're trying to get this thing converted into Morse code so that you can listen to it that way too. But those transcriptions are very expensive, and Larry is not quite ready to foot the bill yet.
And they're so long.
Yeah, that's true. I wonder how long a podcast transcribed into Morse code would be. Like a normal episode, not last week's episode. Last week's episode went 2 hours, guys. It was hella long. All right, but let's get some housekeeping out of the way, shall we?
Keep my house.
First thing, new episode of Press Go Live coming out this Friday, featuring variety streamer Lane Pavogi. I'm very, very excited about it. I think you guys are going to enjoy the conversation that we had. So make sure you're subscribed to Press Go Live on podcast services everywhere. And if you're listening and enjoying, please leave us a subscription and a rating. It's greatly appreciated. Also, next Monday, I will be guest hosting on the podcast Project Esports over on twitch.tv/popped_off at 6 p.m. Eastern time. So make sure you're following the channel over there. I'm going to be guesting, hopefully just talking about Overwatch League, because if we talk about anything else, I'm out of my depth. All right, but I'm looking forward to it. Those guys are cool. You'll recognize some of them in chat. Nims41, Beal for Real. Those are two of the hosts over there. So, and then we've got some collaboration in the works. Don't have the details quite hammered out yet, but hopefully we'll have some stuff revolving around E3 to talk about there. And then last item of housekeeping news, starting next week, I will be streaming on a consistent schedule. Rather than being like, some nights it's this time and some nights it's this time, I will be streaming every weeknight starting at 9. And with that, and then I'll do some like off streams on Saturdays and Sundays, just depending on, what's going on around the real world life of Luke Croft. But you can join our Discord or follow me on Twitter to get notifications there. But also within that, guys, we're going to be getting rid of the PvA Weekly Rundown, which is the Saturday morning news show I've been doing. And instead, drum roll, please. The PvA daily rundown at 9 o'clock every weeknight, where you can come by for half an hour, 45 minutes before I start playing video games to listen to me talk about all of the latest gaming news that we have experienced in the last 24 hours. I love talking about gaming news, and now I'm going to get to do it every single day with you guys. So make sure you're following the channel. That's going to be live 9 o'clock every single weeknight. And who knows? Maybe I'll bring on some guests, have some fun. But most likely, I don't have any friends, and it's just going to be me talking about it. All right, guys. I think that's all the housekeeping we got. Am I missing anything here?
I don't know.
I think we've kept house.
All right, fantastic. Well, let's get the podcast started with what have you been playing? Cody, let's start with you. What have you been playing?
Continuing to level up in the division. I'm at level 29. I stopped playing when I realized that nobody could complete the raid.
So, is that because the raid is broken or because console players suck?
It's probably a little bit of both.
Oh, okay, cool.
But like the sheer fact that not many people have completed the raid on console speaks to something within the game itself. I'm still gonna level to 30, but I'll explain why in a bit, I guess, why I've kind of stopped playing that game. But it's because I've mostly been dedicating my time to continuing Assassin's Creed, worked through the Grown-worthy DLC, where my character became a mother and had a child with a lame-ass NPC who's... I don't want to talk about him. We don't need to talk about him. I can see why, like, all the complaints that people had when this happened a few months ago, I totally agree with. It's kind of a betrayal of my character. We talked about this, yada yada yada. But I've also been sinking some time into Plague Tale. Plague Tale Innocence, I guess, is what it's fully called. I've played the first 4 chapters, which I understand is not too far into it, but enough to get a handle on the game. And I'm loving it. Like, I played the opening, I guess, over the weekend, and then I put it down and played a bunch of Assassin's Creed, but I couldn't stop. For some reason, it had wormed its way into my brain, much like the rats in the game.
Yes.
And I just couldn't, I don't know, something about it, something about the tone, the setting kind of just was drawing me in. And so I then proceeded to play the next 3 chapters in one sitting. They're not too long. It's not too long of a game, which is kind of the part of the appeal to me. But I'm loving it so far. I'm riveted by the narrative. I think it sits squarely in that AA space that we've talked about before. Like, the production value isn't incredible, but it's enough to draw you in with its atmosphere. The game, it's not too challenging. It's pretty basic stealth gameplay. There's some light crafting. But the difference between playing when you're in sections with the ravenous rats and the sections where you're playing against the Crusaders or the Inquisition I like that contrast a lot. And the rats are terrifying. Like the visual design around the rats and the visual design around this plague that's kind of seeping into France is really horrifying in all the right ways.
Yeah, I haven't been playing it much. I think I'm like maybe 4 chapters in. How many chapters does the game have?
17, I think.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm not too far through it yet, but I agree with pretty much everything you're saying. There's something kind of jarring because visually the game looks awesome, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like, especially the world elements. There's a little bit of like weirdness with the character designs, but the voice acting, it's not that it's bad like individual performances, but I feel like it's all pieced together really poorly. Like, you can really tell they weren't in the same room when they were recording this stuff. And that's the thing that's been really the most jarring to me, is like just the flow of the dialogue.
That's interesting. I don't get that between the 2 siblings. I think also part of it is that they're speaking in heavily accented English, which I like, because it's not like Assassin's Creed Unity, where they just gave everybody British accents, even though they're supposed to be in France.
You mean it's just foreign accents, man? If you're American, it's just a foreign accent.
Yeah, it's just a foreign accent. It's not from America. It's foreign. I don't know. I kind of like there's an element to the voice acting that's a little bit like overwrought, but I kind of like that. I'm also just a sucker for sibling stories. being one of three myself. So, and being the oldest of three myself. So I definitely connect to it like viscerally on that level.
And because something very similar happened to you, where your whole entire village got slaughtered, and you've got to, save your brother from whatever's ailing him.
I had to walk across animal corpses once or twice in my life.
Who hasn't been there, right?
I know.
But yeah, I also agree that like I feel like I'm to the point where the game has pretty much taught me all of the mechanics I'll be leveraging for the game, and I'm like, there's not a ton of depth to this, but I'm also one of those guys with games like that. I'm like far more interested in the story than I am necessarily. Like the gameplay is just kind of getting in the way of me figuring out, like getting to the next cutscene.
Yeah, and the good thing is it's not super challenging gameplay. It's very, very rudimentary stealth stuff. And honestly, I prefer it that way. I'd rather not just get hung up on a level and not be able to move forward. So, I mean, it's good enough to... The story is well done to the point that I'm fascinated to see where it's going. And if I wasn't doing this podcast, I'd be playing through it. And the gameplay is good enough to just kind of guide you from one section to the next.
Well, I'm sorry we're getting in the way of your life, Cody.
Every time.
I too wrestle with addiction.
Yeah.
All right, Larry, on to you. What have you been playing?
So I've got this addiction called Apex Legends. And I love it. And that's all I'll say. I just keep playing it. And then the only other thing I've played this week is also The Division 2. I've been experimenting with different ways to play, and the game's just no fun if I'm not lighting people on fire. That's just all there is to it. So I finally hit 30. I can't wait to finish the stronghold so I can get the survivalist specialty, so that I can light even more things on fire.
Yes.
And yeah, that is the extent of my playing this week.
All right, cool. Well, I'm not going to have much to add here. I've been playing through a Plague Tale, playing the Division. I'm not quite to 30 yet. I think one more night of grinding and I'll be there finally. And then I finally had my first good day on Overwatch in a long time on Sunday.
Nice.
Streamed it and had a really great time. A lot of people coming by and hanging out. So it was a ton of fun. And I'm excited to play more Overwatch for the first time in a while. something just kind of clicked. I think I've got my settings right with like my sensitivity and stuff, and the mouse and keyboard is just starting to feel a little more natural.
Man, I want to jump into this event in Overwatch. A lot of these skins look awesome this time. It's been a long time since they had an event where I was like, there are a lot of skins I'd like to have rather than just one.
That Winston skin is awesome.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
the Pharaoh one's really cool too. The spacesuit.
I don't think I've seen the Pharaoh one yet.
It's pretty nice.
I was going to say I'll pull it up, but this is mostly an audio show. TTV Derpy wants to know who reads the chat. We all kind of, well, me and Larry keep up with the chat, but it's mostly, if you stay on topic, we're likely to read your comment. Otherwise, you'll want to hang out for the after party lounge. So, all right, guys. Well, let's move into our topics. And Larry, we're going to kick it off with you this evening.
Oh gosh, for some reason I didn't expect that. You know what else I didn't do?
What's that?
Start the timer.
He never starts the timer, ladies and gentlemen.
That's not
So when
true.
you're like,
I had a streak of doing a great job, and then last week it began to fall apart.
yeah,
But that's neither here nor there. What is here is this. This week we learned that there were some issues with Call of Duty. So Sledgehammer will no longer be doing the next Call of Duty game. Instead, Treyarch's going to be doing that. And I hesitated to make this my topic because of the three of us, I have the least experience with Call of Duty games. But I felt that it was a lot more important than my other potential topic, which was Minecraft AR.
which we can talk about in the after party lounge.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I can just hammer that out here because, Luke, you said it earlier. All there is really to talk about. Will it be as big as Pokemon Go? No. Next topic. But it is kind of an interesting story. And so my understanding of the story, and if you two find some inaccuracies in this, feel free to jump in and correct my understanding. But Sledgehammer was working on the next COD game. Activision decided that they were going to be working with Raven, and it seems like there was some tension that happened when that happened, and the two guys who co-founded Sledgehammer left, And now Sledgehammer's not doing the game at all. It's going to be Treyarch. And
so I want to chime in because I want to make sure I'm clear on my understanding here. In the Kotaku piece, it made it sound as if they had already made the call that Raven was going to be leading this next Call of Duty project, correct? And that Sledgehammer was going to be assisting them?
that is not how I understood it.
I think
it's possible I've misunderstood.
I think it was dual leadership.
Okay.
The language is assigning Wisconsin-based support studio Raven to take a leadership role alongside Sledgehammer.
There we go. That's it.
Yeah. So, I mean, things always go well when you have two people in the lead. So in any case, this is going to have a whole slew of effects, I believe, because now Call of Duty has had this smooth release schedule where you've got 3 studios and you're releasing a game every year. So essentially each studio is on a 3-year development cycle. But now this is going to bump Treyarch up to, hey, you only have 2 years to accomplish what you did last time in 3 years. I'm not sure what's going on with Sledgehammer, so let's just talk about this. And the first thing I want to ask, I couldn't find an answer to this, and I'm hoping one of you knows something that I'm unclear on. Why was Raven brought in to assist Sledgehammer or to co-lead with Sledgehammer?
Okay, I think I can add some color to this. So I was looking up kind of the history of Raven. So Raven was purchased by Activision in like the late 90s. So, and they've been heavily involved in Call of Duty since like the late 2000s. So like 2008, 2009. And they had also taken the lead on a couple other projects with Call of Duty. They did the Call of Duty Online that was exclusive to China. It was free to play. And then they also did the remaster of Call of Duty Modern Warfare. And so I think that they were likely brought on because Activision is seeing kind of the foray into the free-to-play market, and where Raven has that experience. They were like, well, let's bring them in and they can kind of speak wisdom into those portions that we're trying to add.
Okay. That makes sense to me.
And I also could see, I'm sorry, one more thing. I can also see the fact that it was just like, we lost 2 of our like head executives at Sledgehammer, and rather than quickly trying to turn around and get somebody else into those roles, we can bring in Raven, who already has established people in those roles. I could see that. That one I'm a little less confident in, but
I thought those guys left after Raven was brought in. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry too.
It's all very complicated.
Yeah.
And we can hash that out later, but in any case, you've got this mess, and my assumption is that Treyarch was brought in to clean up the mess, because the whole Sledgehammer Raven fiasco has got us to a point where this next game was not going to release in any kind of great state. And rather than Activision pumping the brakes, here we are. Let's just push the schedule up on Treyarch's game. So what's done is done. We're about to see a Call of Duty game from Treyarch next year. So a couple of questions that I kind of want to explore. How do you think pushing Treyarch to release a year early is going to affect the game? How do you think it's going to affect Treyarch? And how do you think this is going to affect Activision?
It's interesting. This is, I don't think we've said, but this is for Black Ops 5. And it is a Call of Duty that will feature a campaign and multiplayer. So that's a lot to do in 2 years. Yeah. Even if you do have most of the groundwork set, like they essentially, they use the same engine. But that's a lot of work to do in 2 years. And especially, like, it sounds like it's going to take place during the Cold War, like a lot of Black Ops do. It's going to take place supposedly in Vietnam. A campaign taking place in Vietnam requires a certain amount of care and sensitivity that perhaps Call of Duty isn't always known for, but I just think if we're talking about the question of what this will do to Treyarch, it's gonna create crunch. There's no two ways around it. It's gonna create crunch, and that's the most unfortunate byproduct of this. I don't know. So we haven't heard what the breakdown between responsibilities between Raven and Sledgehammer was on this game. Raven is historically a studio that assists on the production of a lot of these, usually with the multiplayer, as far as I understand. And so I assume that that is more the role they will be taking on now. But that still is not gonna. It's still not gonna move this to a place where it can be completed adequately within 2 years, at least I believe. So I think the most unfortunate side effect is it's just gonna cost a lot of people, like we've been talking about, a lot of time, their health, their sanity, their relationships. It's a theme we keep on seeing over and over again, and so far we haven't seen too much of that coming out of this division of Activision, because they are on a tight 3-year schedule. It's a well-oiled machine as far as we know. But yeah, it's sad to see that we can already know how this is going to end.
Yeah. And I don't know that this was ever confirmed, but there were whispers that the last game didn't have a campaign because they didn't have time to do it well with all the other stuff they were doing. And so that gives me concerns about, well, how are you going to make time this go around on a shorter time frame? And if you do, how good is it going to be?
Yeah. Well, and we'll also talk about what Activision's place and role is with this in the industry now. I think the last game not having a campaign and having the game modes it had specifically speaks to how they were trying to experiment in a segment of the industry they haven't exactly succeeded in so far.
Yeah, and I wanted to call out. We have a guy in our Discord who's been a longtime fan of the show, Pez, who he's a big Blackout fan, and he loves he loves the Black Ops franchise. But he said, so Call of Duty is struggling, and Activision is putting the dev studio it has complete control over in charge of the next game, when their latest game has been the most poorly managed of any Call of Duty to date. And then he jokingly says that's not concerning. It just sounds like a complete shit show in every studio that develops Call of Duty. It's not big news that free-to-play has caused disruption across the industry, and it sounds like Activision's relationships with the developers in the Call of Duty franchise is being affected in a big way too. So I appreciate his insight here into the fact that Black Ops has been mismanaged. I know that it has not retained the player base that Call of Duty is historically known for retaining, but I think the most interesting, I agree with you, Cody. It's going to create so many issues at the studio and developer level in terms of people. But I think the interesting conversation to me especially is Activision's entire strategy with the Call of Duty franchise, and the fact that for Activision Blizzard right now, this is their moneymaker. Like, they are not making other games, essentially. They're not putting much of anything else out. Activision especially isn't doing much in the way of development. They're publishing games here and there. But, it's just hard to see them take this franchise they put so many eggs into the basket of and then continuously dilute it. And it just makes me wonder, like, I think we've been kind of sounding the alarm about the end of Call of Duty for years now, and every year they somehow continue to prove us wrong, and that may be, just strong brand recognition or the fact that they just kind of own the holiday season with their releases. And, at the end of the day, when it comes to what most people look for in those kind of games, they're relatively high quality in terms of gameplay, but I think you have to reach the end of the line sometime, and if they're really only going to be trusting 2 different studios to head these projects up and still want to own each and every fall, I just don't think you can keep that pace up. But I also think if Call of Duty moves to any other kind of model where they're like a biannual release, that they don't keep the momentum that they've spent the last 15 years building.
Yeah. So for me, the effects that I see, it's just like an avalanche in my mind. The quality of this game is going to suffer. Like, crunching it out this quickly. I don't see how you produce a game that's excellent in every way that needs to be excellent. B, the effect on Treyarch, you're right, it's going to be crunch. And what interests me there is that's something that's being discussed so much right now, that I feel like if you're a studio, the last thing you want to do is start making the news for overworking your employees right now, because you're going to be talked about. And it looks like, I mean, the way things are rumbling, I wouldn't be shocked to finally see some big changes coming in the industry. Like, I'm really hoping for it. And so this could cause problems for Activision down the road if they force this studio into just heavy overwork. And you've already lost the co-founders of Sledgehammer. I think once you start crunching people, you start burning employees out. And I've got family that works in the medical industry and some other industries, and it's just a common thing I see. Once you create an environment that's not pleasant to be in, you lose employees, which makes the environment less pleasant to be in, and it just becomes this vicious cycle that's hard to break out of. And so potentially, I think this could be a really big deal for Activision. And Luke, you've already touched on this, and I think you've already answered this, but I wanted to pose this question. Is it that Activision can't pump the brakes, or that they won't pump the brakes? Because when this next game fell apart, for me, the logical thing is, well, crap, we better step back and make sure we're putting something good out the next go around. But that's not their reaction. Their reaction is, it's November. There's got to be a Call of Duty. Is it that they just don't want to, or do they have to do that to keep functioning well?
I think they have to, and I don't think it's just in order to keep functioning well. Activision is a publicly traded company with shareholders that they're beholden to. And if they say that there's going to be a game released in this time, it's the same problem we run into with EA, right? When they're like, oh man, we know Mass Effect Andromeda shit, but we have to release it before the end of this fiscal year because that's what we've told our shareholders. Or we know Anthem shit, but we got to release it. I think you're running into the same thing here, that people have already started making investments into the next year with Activision, and they've already made promises to their shareholders, and you can't just go back on those plans. So I think it's that they have to, because they're just beholden to what they've told them. But I also think it is a strategy thing of, if they give up that spot, I think they lose a tremendous amount of momentum that has carried them for a long, long time now.
And I think what you said was right, Luke. They're stuck between two very different models. And two very different generations of shooters. Call of Duty as a product looks really out of place in today's shooter market. It just does. Like, you have especially when they release a battle royale segment of their game with a $60 price tag attached to it. Granted, that comes with 2 other modes, but the majority of people who are playing that game bought it for the battle royale mode. We've seen that. I just think, like, this starts to raise a lot of red flags, or at least puts a cap on those red flags and makes me notice them more in terms of how sustainable this model is, especially because this is, like you said, Luke, this is pretty much the only basket that they have at this point.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of it. That has a lot of eggs riding on that one basket. There is a battle royale with the quality, I think the quality of shooting that Blackout has, Apex.
Yes, PUBG.
And PUBG, the best shooter out there on the market. And there's a battle royale out there with a far superior model in Fortnite. And not that Call of Duty Black Ops 4 was only a battle royale game, as many other things, but they were clearly dipping their toes in a market and a model that they're not familiar with, and their competitors have already beat them to. I'm starting to think about what Call of Duty looks like moving forward, and I am worried that I'm worried that they're not adapting, and they're pretty much just trying to survive and pulling back to what they know and what they've done in the past.
Yeah. Back when Bungie pulled out and took Destiny with it, I think Luke, you talked then about the risk of Activision relying entirely on Call of Duty, or maybe you initiated a conversation. I can't remember where we came down on it, but we talked about that, all their eggs being in this basket. And here we are. I think you're right that they have to release this game. They have to. But what happens if it is like what? Call of Duty is always the best seller, right? But what happens if 1 year it just tanks? Like, how bad is that for Activision? Can they swallow that?
Well, it doesn't even have to tank, right? Like, we've already seen what happens when Activision comes up even just a little short of their expectations. And I think that's also another thing that's going to make it really difficult when they go to expand these teams out to try to, meet these deadlines. They're going to need a lot more employees to push these games across the line in this timeline. And people are going to remember the layoffs that happened earlier this year at Activision, and there's a lot of, I think it's hard to make the decisions that they made then and then turn around and say, oh, well, now we're hiring for, 150, 200 positions at our studio to try to get Call of Duty across the finish line. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I have nothing else to add, really. This is not a cheerful story. I'm not a huge COD fan, but I don't want to see the franchise fail by any means. But this does give me concerns for the future of Call of Duty and for the future of Activision.
Yeah,
I do want to quickly mention, Larry, you mentioned the ripple effects that this will have on development schedules moving forward. I think they're probably already planning for this, but it will be interesting moving forward what ripples we'll see. They're going to stick to that annual timeline, but I think there will be some shifting around of priorities and shifting around of studios a little bit, which should be interesting.
Yeah,
it's going to be interesting just to see how they adapt to the model also, because not only, and Cody, you mentioned this about it just seeming out of place, but it's not just out of place because they've stuck to their guns, right? Like, we talked about the marketing of Black Ops 4, in that it seemed like it was marketing 3 totally separate games, right?
Yeah.
Like, we've got zombies, we've got battle royale, we've got regular multiplayer, and it's like that just doesn't work in today's world. Like, you have to have a singular message and be like, and say, this is our game and this is what you do. So I wouldn't be totally shocked if we just saw them say, we're going to return to standard Call of Duty practices with Black Ops 5, with campaign and multiplayer, and then say we're going to break out Battle Royale to be the free-to-play mode, and just run that on the same model that we're seeing successful with Fortnite, that we're seeing with a similar level of success with not similar level, but a semblance of success with Apex as well. Like, so I'm just really interested to see how they decide to model this game moving forward, because with it being their only game, they have to have a box edition, right? That they can sell in stores, people can pre-order, but they also have to dip their toes into this free-to-play, and I just don't know if there's a graceful way to do that.
Yep.
Roy Speedrun wants to know, did his stream inspire this COD topic?
Yeah, it did. Roy Speedrun is one of the best 52 players in Call of Duty Blackout, because literally his game would find 52 players and it would be like, all right, that's close enough. Let's start this battle royale game. All right, guys, let's move on. Cody, what is your topic?
Well, we were talking a little bit about some battle royale, and you can't talk about battle royale without talking about Epic.
Does Epic make a battle royale?
I don't know if you've heard. There's this company called Epic. You might know them from their game store, but they also make games. They make game. But yeah, so another kind of tricky story for the Epic Game Store. They recently kind of started the push for their big sale, so sort of similar to the Steam sale. Only a few developers and publishers chose not to participate in the sale, and by chose not to participate in the sale, I mean they just pulled their game from the Epic Store temporarily, I should add. And I guess the biggest and most notable example of that was Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2, which is a revival of the Vampire Masquerade kind of franchise.
And
it's
a mouthful.
A total mouthful. But so I think it all started with them pulling their game from the store, and the game just kind of disappeared. It was briefly available for the discounted price, but then suddenly it was pretty much just not existent on the store. It would give you an error message if you tried to go to the page. And so, courtesy of Nathan Grayson's reporting over at Kotaku, they reported that an Epic representative told Kotaku that Vampire the Masquerade publisher Paradox chose at the last second or after the last second, technically, to not participate in the sale. And the Epic rep was pretty upfront about if publishers or developers choose not to participate in the sale, they honored that decision. There was another smaller developer who chose not to participate in the sale as well. Oxygen not included was the game. It's a space station survival sim. Published, and the developer and publisher is Cly Entertainment. They also chose not to participate in the sale. It is notable that neither of these are exclusives, are Epic Store exclusives. And before we kind of dive into this topic, I guess I just want to talk about the design of this sale, because I think there's some interesting aspects to it. Mainly, I want to make sure I get the details of this right. This is a mega sale that basically included like the standard percentage discounts, but it also included an additional $10 off any game priced $14.99 or higher, which is a little bit different, and notably different because Epic is absorbing that cost. The developer is not paying for that, which sort of makes it difficult for them to resume that on other stores. It makes it difficult for them to kind of like spread that. And so let's just talk about the sale in general. It's hard to do a sale, especially on a storefront like this. Valve somehow, I mean, they figured it out, but it took them a while to figure that out. This is Epic's first time doing it. So what do you guys think about the sale? And what do you think it says that specific developers like this were pulling out?
So does Valve do sales where they're just like, yo dog, everything on Steam, every single thing is 15% off? Do they do that? Because like I think about, PlayStation Store and Xbox Store, it's never like that. There's like publisher sales or, here's this corner of games that has a percentage off. But this story makes it sound like Epic was like, yo, everything we sell is X% off.
Steam does the summer sale and their winter sales, which are pretty comprehensive. But it's never, it would be impossible to discount everything because Valve just has so much stuff. But yeah, this sounds like they didn't really give developers the chance to like opt out of it.
Yeah, the way Vampire pulled out, it seems like the makers of Vampire got on the internet and were like, what? Our game's on sale? And that's never good.
It's also notable that Vampire, the Masquerade's not out yet.
Yeah.
These are pre-orders that were being discounted.
Yeah. Well, and I think I think Nathan Grayson did a fantastic job of like adding context around why this matters. And I think with the context, it was more to me like less of like a blunder in the structure of the sale and more of a blunder in communication to the publishers
100%.
and developers that are putting their games on this store. And my first thought was actually like, was this a tech issue in that they couldn't unapply the sale from the game with it being on the store? Like there was no checkbox they could mark to opt them out, and so the only solution was to pull the game completely off the store? Or was there something missing from the terms that of the $10 that said that publishers were able to opt out of it? Like, so I think these are just like, it's just like growing pains, but it is one of those things. Like, one of the things he mentions in the article about Vampire is, you don't want to do a discount like that on, a third-party store for a pre-ordered game, because it's going to hurt your relationship with other third-party storefronts, because people will just look and say, oh, well, I can, just wait because it's going to go on sale over on the Epic store and pre-order it over there. And for small developers, those relationships are so important. And if Epic's not paying for exclusivity for those, they can't make decisions that are going to damage those relationships without their consent.
100%. And I think, to the point of it being also a technical thing, there's also the case of Hades, which is Supergiant Games, Epic Store exclusive, which had some weird pricing adjustments that were made throughout the sale. It was briefly priced at $6.99, which was not the correct sale price. And then they fixed that, but they changed the base price for what the game is normally priced at. So it sounds like there were just a lot of, like you were saying, there are a lot of kind of technical hiccups that are happening here that are growing pains, but also perhaps emblematic of larger structural issues with how the storefront is kind of run. And I guess where I really want to go with this is, I think there's been a lot of goodwill tossed Epic's way with the way its store is set up hypothetically. I think it's certainly Spartan in terms of its features, and we've talked about that before, especially compared to Steam. But the revenue cut it gives developers, and the exclusives it's been racking up are impressive. And this isn't the first stumbling block they've hit. Obviously, we've heard other kind of weird, like the whole Metro deal that happened earlier. I just, worried is the wrong word, because I have no investment, literally or figuratively, in Epic's success. But I do wonder, at what point do Epic's missteps become more than just stumbling blocks or like growing pains? And at what point does holding up the sign of "we're better than Valve" not become an excuse, but like an actual problem?
I feel like this is such a unique situation, because Epic was able to just immediately be a player in the market due to the amount of money that they have. But at the end of the day, like, this is not something that they have experience in. And so they're just as good at this as somebody like, as a smaller storefront coming into this. So there's going to be a lot of those same mistakes, and that there's just a much larger microscope on them, because there's a lot more cash being thrown around. There's a lot more dick swinging that Epic's been doing with the store too, and sweeping up exclusives. And, you talk about goodwill, and while I can see that, there's also been a lot of undue bad will towards
a lot of backlash
towards Epic for the decisions that they've made too. And so I don't know, man, like, this, to me, this is more a story like, we're going to run this story because people just want to hear negative shit about the Epic store. Like, is it inconvenient? Is it strange? Does it communicate some, behind the scenes issues that are possibly taking place at Epic? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, I read this and look at it and I'm like, yeah, this just sounds like something that they're figuring out. And they're going to have to make a lot of dumb mistakes to get to the point where they've got it figured out. And we just have to come to expect that. Like, does it really impact the consumer outside of just like, oh, we had to wait for them to give a statement on why this game was missing? Like, outside of that, I don't know. Nobody lost any money on this, I don't think, consumer-wise.
No.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with that. Just it's an obvious growing pain situation, and that it's funny to me because it's basically Epic's story, right? Oh man, we're in over our heads and we have to learn on the fly. So I don't know if anyone's prepared to learn and adjust quickly. I think it's Epic. Now I will say that they do need to learn lessons from this and make sure they don't make the same mistakes again. You don't want to see a pattern of, man, Epic just doesn't know how to manage their storefront. That would be a problem. But this one incident, like, I don't see it being a huge problem.
I think
it may
go ahead.
it may have had some small effects on some studios briefly, but I don't think any long-term damage has been done.
Yeah, I think that's the side of it that's probably a little more important, is when they go to try to broker new deals with other companies, that they're just going to have to be able to defend what they and state what they've learned from these mistakes and the things that they've put in place to avoid these things happening again. Because you're right, Larry, this story does read like somebody from the studio making Vampire woke up and was like, wait, our game's how much over on Epic? Hold on, take that down.
Yeah, and that's the part I think I'm most curious about that. We kind of presumed that, but we don't really know. They may have known about this and there's just a communication breakdown, but I would be interested in knowing. It sounds like Supergiant knew there was a sale. Supergiant is exclusive, their game is exclusive to the Epic Games Store. Mm-hmm. So I think there is a way to look at this and perhaps sort of tell a little bit in how Epic perhaps treats its exclusive games and its non-exclusive games, and it prioritizing one over the other in terms of what views its value as. It's obviously been focusing very heavily on exclusives. It has a healthy lineup of third-party titles as well. And I have no details to pin this on, but there's a way you look at this story and see, they didn't really. There was a communication breakdown with a non-exclusive game, but it seems like their exclusive studios were very much aware of this sale. Interesting.
Do you think that they also have like this mindset that views all of the third-party games as pseudo-exclusive games because they're just kind of like, well, they're getting a better cut with us anyway, so they'll let us kind of get away with whatever we want?
I don't know. I really don't know. I'd be interested to talk to the folks at Epic. I doubt they would give concrete answers.
Yeah, I doubt they'd be like, oh, yeah, we kind of don't even think about all those other competitors.
Yeah, I don't know. I do think there's a way of looking at this story as emblematic of how perhaps they view their priorities in general. But again, I think this is a stumbling block and a mistake they have plenty of time and resources to kind of overcome. But I think it's notable when these things start to add up enough, and we'll see over the next few months if they do.
And with the studio, with the storefront trying to grow, all that going on, what you're saying is there's a way to read this story this way. That matters whether it's actually the accurate version of what happens or not, because the perception is going to affect future interactions with people. And that's where you got to be careful. Just make sure people know you learned from the mistakes and don't repeat them.
Yeah, Epic's been a victim recently of perception, I think. Whether or not it's warranted.
An understatement of the podcast.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Let's move on to the final topic. We're good there, right? We good?
Yeah.
All right, cool.
We good?
There's two small indie companies, Microsoft and Sony.
I think I've heard of them.
Yeah, they've made such exclusives as Knack 3 and a little game called I was trying to think of literally any Xbox exclusive that wasn't Halo.
I think they're the ones who make Hello?
Yes, Hello.
Okay.
No, guys, the console wars are over. Just weld your Xbox and PlayStation together because they are now one and the same. There's a strategic partnership that has been brokered, and we will all be able to game in one harmonious heaven that is known as the Playbox 320. All right, guys.
Playbox 320. Catchy.
This is from Tom Warren over on The Verge. It says Microsoft and Sony.
Clear, what Luke's about to say is from Tom Warren, not what he just said.
Excuse me? Here's the actual story. Microsoft and Sony are announcing an unusual partnership today, allowing the two rivals to partner on cloud-based gaming services. Quote, the two companies will explore joint development of future cloud solutions in Microsoft Azure to support their respective game and content streaming services, end quote, Microsoft said in a statement. Sony's existing game and content streaming services will also be powered by Microsoft Azure in the future. Microsoft says, quote, these efforts will also include building better development platforms for the content creator community, end quote, which sounds like both Sony and Microsoft are planning to partner on future services aimed at creators and the gaming community. Both companies say they will, quote, share additional information when available, end quote, but the partnership means Microsoft and Sony will collaborate on cloud gaming. That's a pretty big deal, and it's a big loss for Microsoft's main cloud rival, Amazon. It also means Google, a new gaming rival to Microsoft and Sony, will miss out on hosting Sony's cloud service. Google unveiled its Stadia gaming services earlier this year, and the company will use YouTube to push it to the masses. And then it goes on to talk about, the streaming future and who the players are and all of that. So, guys, this is a great story. This is a perfect Luke story, right? Because in my perusing throughout all of the great gaming Facebooks that just are kernels of wisdom to be gleaned from all over, 1.5 million people misunderstanding what the fuck this story means, right? And so let's go ahead, Larry.
I mean, clearly it means that Sony is helping produce the next Halo, and it's going to have
microphones cutting in and out.
Ah, man, what is happening?
Did you move your entire desk? Is that what happened?
Obviously. What other solution was there?
So a lot of people looked at this story and they're like, oh my God, we're going to be playing Halo on PlayStation. We're going to be playing The Last of Us Part 2 on Xbox. This is hot damn. Console wars are over. And I'm like, look, if the console wars ended today, there's roughly 200 million people who would lose every semblance of identity that they've gained within themselves. Right? So I want us to be very clear here at the start of this topic about what this does not mean. This does not mean that Sony is going to throw out all of the IP that it spent years and years building and start putting it on Xbox platforms. All this story means in the short term is PlayStation is that Microsoft is licensing out their Azure servers to PlayStation to be able to host their streaming services on it because Sony does not have the infrastructure necessary to create a robust enough streaming service to compete. But Microsoft needs the strategic partnership because Google and Amazon are going to be huge players in the gaming space here in the next 5 to 10 years. So, go ahead.
Would a good analogy be the fact that your Xbox has a Blu-ray player in it, which was developed by Sony? It's kind of the same concept, right? They're licensing out the technology, not, and that's it. It's just that one little piece.
It's similar, I think. And I do think it, now look, I'm not saying that this deal is without its hangups and things that we can possibly concern ourselves with, but the only reason that I don't want to make a one-to-one comparison through with Blu-ray is that Sony doesn't exclusively own Blu-ray. I think they were kind of like the pioneers behind the technology, but at a point, like 14 other companies came in and all own like a stake in Blu-ray. So while yes, Sony gets a little bit of a cut for every Xbox that's sold with a Blu-ray player in it, so do 14 other companies. Whereas Microsoft fully owns the Azure server network, and benefits 100% off of Sony taking advantage of it. First of all, I just want to get you guys' initial thoughts on the story and the reaction to the story that people are having, and kind of how you see this playing out in terms of the relationship between these two companies who have been really combative towards one another for their lives, and if this really is us moving towards more of a peaceful, harmonious relationship.
I'm not optimistic that it'll move us toward a very peaceful, harmonious relationship. My initial reaction, I was a little surprised, to be honest, but then the more I thought about it, the more it just made sense in terms of we haven't seen the same rumblings about Sony exploring the cloud gaming space as we've seen other studios exploring. And it just kind of makes sense. All right, they haven't progressed on that yet, so why not partner with somebody who is? Like you said, it makes sense from Microsoft's perspective of if we don't, one of these other competitors is going to. But then for these two to pair together makes a lot of sense because for a long time now, it's basically been the console wars is PlayStation versus Microsoft. You've got all these newcomers coming in and, you know, the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yeah, and those newcomers are absolute gigantic monolithic companies. Like the first thing I thought was Google, like Google didn't send a ripple through this industry. Google sent a fucking tidal wave through this industry. And it's also, I mean, it's two companies that need something from each other. It's not the end of ongoing console wars. They're too invested in that drives sales. I just think it's a sign of two companies that need something from each other and two companies that have been at the game for a while, see these newcomers, these frightening newcomers coming in and realizing that they can get what they need from each other and still maintain their identities. Maybe perhaps down the line, some strategic partnerships in terms of cross-platform stuff. That seems to be where things are moving. We'll talk about that, I assume. But mostly the story was just emblematic of the massive shadow that Google has cast with its announcement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you think the benefit is for Microsoft? Just the licensing money?
It's a big client.
Yeah.
Sony is a massive client. I think I do sort of. I think Sony's probably getting a lot more out of this deal than Microsoft is. But I read an article, and I am not super tech savvy when it comes to this stuff. But the fact that Sony does sort of provide them some sort of technological advantage as well as something about scanning, like face scanning and stuff like that, for perhaps something that Microsoft needs to do as well. So I think there is some sort of tech exchange, but I think it's mostly just a massive client and taking Sony off the playing field for the other companies to kind of snatch up.
I could also see, and this is wild speculation, but
Speculation.
That's what we do.
Speaking of the cross-platform play that seems to be on the horizon, I could see a world where a game releases on every, right, including the Google stuff, and Sony and Microsoft being able to come together and be like, but you can play with your PlayStation friends if you're playing it on Microsoft's console stuff, and vice versa. But we aren't playing with the Google people, right?
Stadia.
Wild speculation, but I could see them doing, like, that's an option on the table in the future.
Yeah. Well, and even sooner down the line, it is a foot in the door for Microsoft at a place where they've been like knocking for years now with Sony. You know, a strategic partnership here, like you said, Cody, does possibly spell strategic partnerships in other areas. And I do think that we're moving to this point where the gaming world is going to be so connected that and we're probably already there, and Sony's just kind of been left in the dust, that it just doesn't make sense to have these walled gardens outside of just these particular franchises that you want to protect. But like, if games are available on other services, we should be able to play with people on these other services. I do think your point is an interesting point, Larry, but I also think that I disagree with your point. I don't think that Microsoft as a, what is going on? I feel like you're trying to be inconspicuous with whatever it is you're trying to do, and you're failing at it.
Distract you.
Well, you failed. You failed miserably.
My wife moved my desk, and she doesn't like to show up on stream. And I was trying to give her the option of passing through in the inconvenient location she stuck me without being on my camera.
All right. Well, let me get back to talking about why you're wrong as shit. All right. Because No, I disagree that Microsoft is ever going to get to a point where they're telling people no with cross-platform play. I think it would be a major backpedal for the brand they've attempted to establish over the last 3-4 years. So I just don't think it would make sense for them to say like, oh, we're scared of you, Google Stadia. We're not going to play with you, because I think there's so much more benefit for them now in being able to say, oh yeah, man, you buy this Xbox platform, you can play with your friends who are playing on Google Stadia, on PlayStation, on Nintendo Switch, on Amazon, on the now defunct Ouya.
On the refrigerator screen?
Yes.
Where you're playing Skyrim?
Yes.
The best way to play.
I ate the whole block of cheese. Yeah, so I'm sorry. My mind is so scattered tonight. I'm all over the place, guys.
It's all right. Stretch out.
It's not like anything distracting happened in the last minute.
Yeah, seriously. If you guys are watching or are listening on audio, Larry was like putting his hand over the camera while I was talking.
Why do you concern yourself with what I'm doing? You just focus on you.
I will. I also wanted to bring up the story that's published over here on Variety from Stephanie Fogel. It says, last week, Sony and Microsoft surprised the gaming community by announcing a strategic partnership where they will work together on cloud technology. Apparently, no one was more shocked than the PlayStation team, who were blindsided by the deal, according to a report by Bloomberg. So it appears that the people working at Sony were not aware of any kind of strategic partnership between Microsoft and Sony before this announcement. What do you guys make of that?
It's hilarious, but it also makes sense to me. I feel like this is something that you didn't want to leak. You wanted to really control the messaging so that speculation didn't get too wild. And
as it didn't,
As it didn't. And so it kind of, it sucks to be working somewhere and find out from someone else what your company's doing. But at the end of the day, it makes sense to me from a perception control standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, these are high-level decisions, especially something like this. So it does not surprise me that a lot of people in Sony did not know this was happening. It ultimately doesn't really have any bearing on a lot of their work, I would assume. Otherwise, they would have known. But I mean, you see stories like this happen all the time. There are a lot of things that companies keep very close to the chest, and then their employees figure out when an article is published. So it's not too surprising.
Yeah. I thought this was this whole story. I feel like today's theme, outside of the Call of Duty story, is making mountains out of molehills. Because this does not impact your day to day. Unless these were people who are working on the streaming side of things.
Exactly.
I think this does, and let's get.
Which it doesn't sound like there were many people doing that.
Yeah, seriously, because we can get now. I want to get back to the original portion of the story. It's fascinating because Sony spent so much money on Gaikai and what that service was, and they just could never figure it out. PlayStation Now still functions, but they've also backpedaled in that it used to just be a streaming platform, but now you can download and play those games now on your system. And so that to me is kind of moving in the opposite direction of where you want to go. And so for them to admit, it's almost like, hey, we saw the future before anybody else saw the future with the streaming stuff, but we were not able to scale this even remotely close to the ways that Google and Microsoft were able to. So the only real way that we're going to be able to compete on this side is in the streaming side. But I think it also confirms what we mentioned in the PlayStation 5 conversation a couple weeks ago, is that their strategy still very much lies in this is the box that you buy, that you put your discs in, and you play your games from the comfort of your home without having to worry about latency and streaming and yada, yada, yada.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know. It also confirms Google and Amazon's presence, and it also just confirms that this is the direction that we're moving. And so
Yeah, 100%.
So my last question to you guys is now that the war, what's up?
Before we move on from that, I do, with the whole Sony saw us going this way before anybody else. Ironically, I feel like Microsoft saw it first, and that was part of the movement that they made with trying to have this always online console. I mean, maybe they didn't necessarily see streaming, but I suspect that they did, and they just ran out a little too far ahead of everybody and got shot down for it. But it's interesting to me that the end result is they're better prepared for the always connected world than anybody else was.
Yeah, I don't know if I necessarily read into that as them thinking about streaming. I think they've always, I think for a long time they've had the software as a service kind of mindset. I mean, Azure's not a new project by any means when it comes to this national infrastructure for this global infrastructure for servers. You know, same thing with like AWS, the Amazon Web Service stuff. Like, these are projects that have been in motion for 10, 15, years at this point. But I think Sony was the first gaming company who explicitly stated the streaming idea.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see how quickly they fell behind due to the lack of infrastructure, which was never a surprise to anybody. Like, it was no secret that Sony lacked the technical chops and the infrastructure to be able to accomplish something on a very robust scale. And it was especially made evident when PlayStation Now launched and everybody was like, wait, what? So my last question to you guys before we move on is, now that the war is over, what will you guys do now that you return home from the console wars?
You cut out of the end. What will I do now that what?
What will you do now that you can return home from the console wars?
I don't know if I remember how to exist as someone not fighting the console wars. So what is home? Can I return there?
Great question, Cody. How about
you? The thing about the console wars, it was never about the consoles. Someone got that reference.
I didn't.
It's a Rick and Morty reference.
Oh,
I didn't get the reference. I just thought it was funny.
It was always about the friends we made along the way, and also now I have to fuse both my Xbox and PlayStation together. So give me a little time to do that.
Yeah. Well, for years and years, my wife and I have said we didn't want kids, right? And I always said it was just like, oh, I'm just selfish and I don't have the time. But in reality, it was just like, I knew that between my shit posting and my trolling and my, blasted Microsoft fanboys on the internet, I just would not have the time to raise a child. So I think it's finally time for me to settle down and raise a family. So my wife is now pregnant with quadruplets.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. All right, let's move on to everybody's favorite game that we play at the end of this podcast, Two Truths and a Gaming Lie. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the game that Cody Mellowklein is dominating at. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the game that Larry Hunt has yet to show up for. So let me remind everybody of the score. We played this last week or 2 weeks ago when Cody wasn't on to try to give Larry an opportunity to gain an additional point. Or not an additional point, a singular point. And he failed to do so.
There's always a time.
Let me explain the way the game works first. I have a game that you guys probably have never heard of. Very obscure game. Really, we're talking not even just single A indie studio. We're talking like this game was developed by people on another planet, and it's never even been delivered to Earth.
Oh, wow.
And then I have 3 statements about it. 2 of those are factual. The third is a lie. All right? And we have to suss out which one the lie is. Let's go to the scoreboard, ladies and gentlemen. In the lead, your boy, Luke Croft, the host, with 7 points. And how do I get points? Well, when I have something that they can't guess is an actual lie, then I get the point. All right? When these 2 bozos get it wrong. With 5 points, in second place, we have Cody Mellowklein. Cody, congratulations.
Yeah.
And then I I don't even want to say you're bringing up the rear because you're not. You're like not even on the track. You're not even in the parking lot yet.
I am Anakin Skywalker. Pod racer just stalled out of the start line. Everyone else is way gone.
Also, Ballad of the Salad. Welcome to the stream, my dude.
Hey,
That is a fantastic name. I like saying it. Ballad of the Salad.
Larry has, let me do some calculations real quick. Carry the 1, divide that, multiply it by 0 points, ladies and gentlemen. All right. Your game this week. Little obscure game called Fallout 4. All right.
these are your boys, Larry.
Now Cody is at a little bit of an advantage because this game took place in his hometown. So
It's true.
that may give him some kind of an advantage. Guys,
I doubt it.
Guys, I've got 3 references that are made in the game. One of them is a lie. You guys ready for this? Number 1. After meeting the railroad in the Old North Church, there's a brief window in the game where users can cross the bridge to Oakwood and find a man in a phone booth yelling, "Hello, hello, my name is Mike Ferris." A nod to the very first episode of The Twilight Zone. Where is everybody? Number 2. On a holotape found on the Pridwin, a character references the Underlane Guide of Comic Values. This is a reference to the real-world Overstreet Guide, considered the ultimate reference for comic book values by collectors. Number 3. One of the message in a bottle notes reads, "Come out to the coast. We'll get together. Have a few laughs," which is a reference to Bruce Willis in Die Hard. He says this in the movie sarcastically to illustrate the predicament he's in at Nakatomi Plaza. So, we've got The Twilight Zone, The Overstreet Guide, or Die Hard. Larry, we're going to hand it over to you first. Which of these do you believe is the made-up reference in the game?
I don't know, but I'll bet on Die Hard.
All right.
There's no reasoning this time. I'm not thinking about it.
He is a
It's just
shell. He is a shell of a man, ladies and gentlemen. He says,
He's returned shell-shocked from the console wars.
all right, so you're going with Die Hard. Cody, which one do you think?
Well, my geographical familiarity with Boston did not help me here. So fuck you. What was the second? The second one was something about comics.
Yes. Do you want me to read it again?
No, just what was the name of it?
The Overstreet Guide.
The Overstreet Guide.
Yes.
I'll go with that one.
All right. Well, somebody who hasn't gotten a point in quite a while will be getting a point today. And that is me. It's been 2 weeks since I've gotten a point. The Twilight Zone reference is the made-up reference. And when you started to say that, because, you know, most of the areas in the game are based off of real-world locations in Boston. So when you started,
Most of them.
So when you started to say that your familiarity with the Boston area, I thought you were going to realize that Oakwood is not a part of the Boston area, unless it is, and I just don't know it. But I looked at maps and couldn't find an Oakwood, but I wanted to stay on theme because that's the name of the city in Twilight Zone, that episode.
Well, there's the geography of Fallout 4 is suspect.
Much like Fallout 76.
Much like the entirety of Fallout 76.
I have to travel south of where my dad lives in West Virginia to arrive at a location north of where Dad lives in West Virginia.
There's no Oakwood that I know of in Boston, but they like incorporate like Salem and all these other different parts of the Boston area that aren't part of Boston.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't sure. I wish there was more I wish there were more Twilight Zone references in Fallout.
Yeah, there should be. There should just be more Twilight Zone references everywhere.
Exactly.
Dude, if I was guaranteed to get a voice like Rod Serling, but just by smoking, I would risk the cancer.
Wow. You heard it here first, folks.
Larry endorses
There is a
smoking.
fifth dimension.
All right, guys. Well, I am 2 points away from the 10 points that would secure this victory for me. Larry, you've got to go on quite a bit of an unanswered tear to take this from us, but I believe in you. All right?
I'm glad you do.
All right, let's get out of here.
Hope.
Let's get out of here. Let's go around the circle. Who are you? Where can people find you? What are you going to be tweeting about this week? Larry, who are you?
I'm Larry. You can find me on Twitter at Larry Hunts Zombies, and I'll just be tweeting about all the things that I'm bad at, like 2 truths in a gaming lie, gaming edition, 2 lies and truthfulness.
Mm-hmm. The game, the musical, the series. All right, Coddington.
My name is Coddington /Codsworth / Codifer. You can find me on Twitter at ProElectioneer. I'm going to be tweeting a different quote from Deadwood every day leading up to the Deadwood movie that is airing next Friday. And they will all have a lot of profanity in them because those are the only quotes that are worthwhile in Deadwood.
All right, fantastic. My name is Luke Croft. You can find me on Twitter at Hoagie_OW. And this week I will be releasing the video of where I surprised my son at school when I returned home from the console wars. It's touching. All right, guys, this has been PvA Radio over here on twitch.tv/PvA Radio every Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We go live and we talk about the 3 biggest gaming news stories of the week, and we have an in-depth discussion about it. It's a collaborative audio feature article, or a CAFA, if you will. And Cody, what do we want people to do with that?
Spam the emote, but also tattoo it to both of your shins.
Both of them, and your friends.
And your friends' shins.
If you can't catch us live, you can find us on podcast services everywhere, wherever you're listening to us. We greatly appreciate it. If you're hanging out with us over here on Twitch, feel free to stick around for the After Party Lounge where we get into all kinds of shenanigans. But for all of our podcast listeners, we're going to get out of here. We love you, and goodbye.
Why, that's the second biggest monkey head I've ever seen.
I used to be an adventurer like you. Then I took an arrow in the knee.
The definition of insanity.
Would you kindly pick up that shortwave radio?